The boardroom went silent the moment Cassandra Hayes stood up, her chair scraping against polished marble with a sound that cut through Marcus Hendrick's presentation like a knife. "I'm sorry, but I can't listen to another second of this," she said, her voice steady despite the dozen pairs of eyes suddenly fixed on her. "Mr. Hendrick, with all due respect, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about." Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his laser pointer frozen on the projection screen. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused, as if no one had ever interrupted him before. Which Cassandra realized they probably hadn't. Marcus Hendrick was one of the youngest self-made millionaires in real estate development, known for transforming struggling neighborhoods into thriving communities. He was also known for being brilliant, demanding, and according to every article she'd read, completely insufferable to work with. "Excuse me." His voice was dangerously quiet. Cassandra felt her colleagues shrinking in their seats, but she'd spent 3 years as a community outreach coordinator for the city planning department, and she'd seen too many projects like this one destroy the very communities they claimed to help. She wasn't about to stay silent now. "This development plan you're proposing for the Riverside District, it's going to displace over 200 families. The affordable housing units you're including represent less than 15% of the total development, and even those are priced well above what the current residents can afford. You're not revitalizing a neighborhood, you're erasing it." Marcus set down his laser pointer with deliberate precision. "Miss Hayes, is it? I appreciate your passion, but perhaps you should leave the business analysis to those who understand how development actually works. The economics of this project have been thoroughly vetted by economists who have never set foot in Riverside, I'm sure." Cassandra gathered her portfolio, her hands trembling slightly with adrenaline. "I grew up 3 blocks from there, Mr. Hendrick. I know every family on those streets. Your numbers might work on paper, but in reality, you're about to destroy a community that's been there for generations." She walked toward the door, knowing she was probably throwing away her career with every step. The city needed Hendrick's investment, and she was just a mid-level coordinator who'd been invited to this meeting as a courtesy. "Where do you think you're going?" Marcus's voice stopped her at the threshold. "To do actual work instead of watching you pat yourself on back for gentrification gift-trapped as progress." She turned to face him one last time. "You know what your real problem is, Mr. Hendrick. You're so used to everyone telling you how brilliant you are that you've forgotten how to actually listen. Money doesn't make you right. It just makes you loud." She left before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Behind her, she heard her supervisor apologizing profusely, heard Marcus's cool response that it was fine. Everything was fine. Cassandra knew she'd just committed career suicide, but as she walked back to her tiny office on the 3rd floor, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. What she didn't know was that Marcus Hendrick stood in that boardroom for a full minute after she left, staring at the door with an expression his colleagues had never seen before. Not anger, not dismissal, something closer to fascination. 2 days later, Cassandra was still employed, which surprised her. She'd expected to be fired immediately, or at least transferred to some forgotten department where she'd shuffle papers until retirement. Instead, her supervisor had simply asked her to write a detailed report on her concerns about the Riverside project. She'd stayed up until 3 in the morning working on it, documenting everything from current rent prices to the location of the neighborhood's small businesses, schools, and community centers. She was reviewing the report one more time, sitting at her cluttered desk with her 3rd coffee of the morning, when someone knocked on her office door. "Come in," she called absently, not looking up from her computer screen. Your concerns about the displacement patterns were particularly interesting. Cassandra's head snapped up. Marcus Hendrick stood in her doorway, looking completely out of place in his $1,000 suit amid her walls of community service awards and children's art from local schools. He was taller than she'd realized during the boardroom meeting, with dark hair that was slightly too long to be corporate, and eyes that were currently scanning her office with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Hendrick." She stood up quickly, nearly knocking over her coffee. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." He stepped inside without invitation, picking up a crayon drawing from her desk. It showed a stick-figure family in front of a small house with a huge sun and the words "Thank you, Miss Hayes" scrawled across the top in uneven letters. "Who's the artist?" "Maria Gonzalez. She's 7. Her family runs a bakery on Riverside Avenue." Cassandra crossed her arms. "They've been there for 23 years. Your development plan would demolish their building to make room for a luxury gym." Marcus set down the drawing carefully. "I read your report, and I think you're right about several things. The affordable housing percentage is insufficient. The displacement projections were underestimated. The community impact assessment was superficial at best." He met her eyes directly. "You were also right that I've been arrogant about this project. I've built 17 successful developments in 5 years, and somewhere along the way, I stopped questioning whether success in business meant I was actually helping people." Cassandra blinked. This wasn't what she'd expected. "So you're canceling the project?" "No, I'm redesigning it. And I want you to help me do it properly." "Why would I help you?" "Because if you don't, the city will approve someone else's plan, and I guarantee it will be worse than mine. At least I'm willing to listen now, thanks to you." He pulled out a business card, setting it on her desk. "I'm offering you a position as community liaison for Hendrick Development. Triple your current salary, full benefits, and complete authority to veto any design element you believe harms the community. I want someone who'll call me out when I'm wrong." Cassandra stared at the card like it might bite her. "You want to hire me because I insulted you in front of your investors. I want to hire you because you're the first person in years who's cared enough about being right to risk being fired for it. That's exactly the kind of person I need." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Think about it, but don't think too long. I'm starting the redesign next week, and I'd rather have you inside the process than protesting outside my office." He left before she could form a response, leaving her standing in her tiny office with a business card that promised a salary she'd never dreamed of earning. She called him that evening. The next Monday, Cassandra walked into Hendrick Development's headquarters in downtown Portland, trying not to feel intimidated by the soaring glass atrium and the receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her own outfit, a simple navy blazer and gray slacks from a department store sale, felt suddenly shabby. "Miss Hayes." A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and exceptionally professional bearing approached. "I'm Patricia, Mr. Hendrick's executive assistant. He's expecting you. Follow me, please." They rode the elevator to the 23rd floor in silence. Patricia led her through an open office space where people worked at standing desks and held meetings in glass-walled conference rooms. Everything was modern, expensive, and slightly intimidating. Marcus's office occupied the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. He was on the phone when Patricia showed her in, but he gestured for Cassandra to sit. "I don't care if it's complicated, James. We committed to preserving that building, so find a way to make it work." He listened for a moment. "Then we'll absorb the cost difference. The Historical Society is right. That facade is worth saving. Make it happen." He hung up and turned his full attention to Cassandra. "Good morning. Coffee?" Please." He poured 2 cups from a sleek machine that probably cost more than her car. "How do you take it?" "Black is fine. A purist. I should have guessed." He handed her the cup and sat in the chair next to hers rather than behind his desk, which surprised her. "I've assembled a team to work on the Riverside redesign. Architects, engineers, financial analysts. But I wanted to start with just you and me, establishing what we're actually trying to accomplish." Cassandra set down her coffee. "What do you think you're trying to accomplish?" "A month ago, I would have said economic revitalization, bringing investment and jobs to an underperforming area, increasing the tax base." He leaned back, and for the first time, she saw something uncertain in his expression. "Now I'm not sure that's the right starting point." "It's not," Cassandra said. "The starting point should be, how do we improve this neighborhood for the people who already live there? How do we add resources without subtracting the community? And you think that's possible, financially viable?" "I think it's harder and less profitable than your original plan. But yes, I think it's possible." She pulled out her tablet, opening the alternative proposal she'd spent all weekend developing. "What if instead of demolishing existing buildings, we renovated them? What if we added housing rather than replacing it? What if we brought in businesses that actually serve the community instead of trying to attract an entirely new demographic?" Marcus studied her proposal in silence, scrolling through her projections and architectural suggestions. "This would take longer to see returns. Yes, the profit margins are significantly lower. Yes, my investors will hate it, probably." He looked up at her and she saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe, or interest. "Let's do it." Over the next 3 weeks, Cassandra learned that Marcus Hendrick was nothing like the arrogant millionaire she'd assumed he was. Yes, he was confident to the point of intimidation. Yes, he expected excellence and had little patience for excuses. But he was also willing to admit when he was wrong, asked genuine questions instead of making assumptions, and worked longer hours than anyone else in the building. They spent nearly every day together, walking through Riverside, meeting with residents, discussing design options until late into the evening. Marcus listened to every concern, took notes on every suggestion, and gradually, Cassandra watched the project transform from a gentrification nightmare into something that might actually help the community. She also found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with work. The way he loosened his tie when he was deep in thought. How he remembered the names of every person they met, from Maria's grandmother at the bakery to the teenager who ran the corner store. The rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face when something pleased him. It was dangerous, this growing awareness. He was her boss. He was a millionaire who lived in a world completely different from hers, and yet she couldn't quite ignore the way her heart jumped whenever he said her name. "Cassandra, look at this." They were in his office late on a Friday evening, the city lights glittering below them. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. Marcus had pulled up a rendering on his computer, a redesigned version of the main plaza that incorporated the community's feedback. The architects figured out how to save the original fountain and add the playground equipment the parents requested. She moved closer to see the screen, suddenly very aware of how near they were standing. "It's perfect. The kids are going to love it. We're presenting this to the city council next Wednesday. I want you to be the one to present the community impact portion. Me, Marcus, you're the developer, you should present. These are your ideas as much as mine now, more actually, you should take credit for them." He turned to face her, and she realized just how close they were standing. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. "You've changed everything about this project. about how I think about this work. I just provided a different perspective. You provided honesty, integrity, a reminder of why I started doing this in the first place. His voice had gone quiet. You've changed more than just the project, Cassandra, her breath caught. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and she wasn't sure what she'd do if he tried. But he stepped back, clearing his throat. It's late. You should go home. Get some rest before next week. The moment broke, leaving Cassandra feeling oddly bereft. Right. Yes, I'll see you Monday. She gathered her things and left, trying to ignore the disappointment settling in her chest. Nothing could happen between them. It was unprofessional, complicated, probably a terrible idea for a dozen different reasons. But as she drove home through the quiet streets, she couldn't stop replaying that moment, wondering what would have happened if he hadn't stepped away. The city council presentation was a triumph. The council members, who'd been prepared to rubber-stamp Marcus's original proposal, found themselves genuinely engaged with the redesigned plan. Cassandra spoke about the community benefits while Marcus handled the financial projections, and together, they painted a picture of development done right. Afterward, council member Patricia Okoye pulled Cassandra aside. I've been watching development projects in this city for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you two just presented. Marcus Hendrick, actually listening to community concerns. I didn't think it was possible. He's better than his reputation, Cassandra found herself defending him. Patricia smiled knowingly. I can see that. I can also see the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Cassandra felt heat rise in her cheeks. We're colleagues, that's all, if you say so. Patricia patted her arm, but for what it's worth, I think you're good for him. I've watched Marcus build his empire these past 5 years, watched him become harder and more isolated with every success. You've reminded him how to be human. That's no small thing. The conversation stayed with Cassandra as they celebrated the council's approval that evening. Marcus had reserved a table at an upscale restaurant downtown, inviting the entire project team. But as the evening wore on and colleagues drifted away, Cassandra found herself alone with Marcus at the bar, nursing glasses of wine and talking about everything except work. When did you know you wanted to go into development? She asked. Marcus swirled his wine, considering. I grew up in a small town in eastern Oregon, the kind of place that's dying slowly, losing young people to cities, watching businesses close one by one. I saw what economic decline does to communities, how it destroys hope. He met her eyes. I thought if I could bring investment and opportunity to struggling places, I could prevent that, save communities instead of watching them disappear. That's not what you said in the articles I read about you. What did those say? That you're a ruthless businessman who sees opportunity where others see obstacles, that you don't let sentiment interfere with profit. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. I spent a lot of time building that reputation. Easier to be ruthless than to admit I actually care. Caring makes you vulnerable. Why tell me this? Because you've already seen through the act. That first day in the boardroom, you looked at me and saw exactly who I'd become. Someone so focused on success that I'd forgotten my original purpose. I didn't like what you saw, but you weren't wrong. He set down his wine glass. You make me want to be better. Do you know how rare that is? Cassandra's heart was pounding. Marcus, I'm not good at this, he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. Relationships, emotions, any of it. I've spent 5 years building a company and convincing myself that was enough. That success could substitute for connection. But these past few weeks working with you, I've realized how empty that is, how empty I've been. You're not empty. You're brilliant and driven and more capable of change than you give yourself credit for. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I know I shouldn't say that. You work for me. It's inappropriate. But I'm terrible at pretending and I don't want to hide how I feel. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Cassandra knew she should be cautious, should think about the implications and professional boundaries and all the ways this could become complicated. Instead, she said, "I'm falling in love with you too." His expression transformed, that rare, genuine smile breaking across his face. "Yeah? Yeah. Even though you're arrogant and bossy and you drink pretentious coffee. You drink the same coffee now. That's how I know it's pretentious." He laughed, really laughed, and reached for her hand across the bar. His fingers were warm, slightly calloused despite his expensive suits. "I want to do this right. Take you to dinner. Actually date you like a normal person. We're having dinner right now. This is a work celebration. I'm talking about a real date, where I pick you up and we go somewhere nice and I spend the whole evening trying to impress you." "You don't need to impress me, Marcus. Maybe I want to anyway." They left the restaurant together, and Marcus insisted on driving her home even though she'd planned to take a cab. The drive across the city was filled with easy conversation, the kind that happens when two people are just beginning to discover each other. He told her about his first disastrous development project, a strip mall that had to be completely redesigned after he'd failed to account for the area's drainage problems. She told him about her college years studying urban planning, working 3 jobs to pay tuition because her family couldn't afford to help. "Is that why you care so much about affordable housing?" he asked as he pulled up in front of her apartment building. "Personal experience. My parents were priced out of their neighborhood when I was 12. Developers came in, renovated everything, and suddenly we couldn't afford rent anymore. We had to move across town, away from my school, my friends, everything familiar." She looked out the window at her modest building. "I became a city planner so I could fight for people like my parents, people who deserve to stay in their communities." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm sorry I've probably done the same thing to countless families with my previous projects. You're changing that now, that matters. Because of you." He turned to face her fully. "Can I see you this weekend, somewhere that has nothing to do with work?" "Are you asking me on a real date, Mr. Hendrick?" "I am, Miss Hayes." "Then yes, I'd like that." He walked her to her door like an old-fashioned gentleman, and when she thought he might kiss her goodnight, he simply squeezed her hand and told her he'd call her tomorrow. She went inside with her heart racing, and a smile she couldn't suppress, feeling like a teenager instead of a 28-year-old professional. Their first official date was Sunday brunch at a small cafe in the Pearl District, followed by a walk through the Portland Japanese Garden. Marcus had traded his usual suit for jeans and a dark sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests in architecture and public art, debating the merits of various urban planning philosophies, laughing at each other's terrible jokes. "I like this version of you," Cassandra said as they stood on a bridge overlooking a koi pond. "What version?" Relaxed. "Not the intimidating CEO. I'm still the CEO on Monday, I know. But right now you're just Marcus. I like just Marcus." He pulled her close, and this time he did kiss her. It was gentle and sweet, tasting of coffee and possibility. When they broke apart, Cassandra felt dizzy with happiness. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Marcus admitted. "What took you so long?" "Professional boundaries. Fear of rejection." "The usual." "Well, for future reference, I'm very unlikely to reject you." "Good to know." They spent the rest of the day together, and when he finally drove her home that evening, Cassandra realized she'd spent nearly 8 hours with him and it felt like minutes. That was something special. Something worth protecting. The next few months were a careful balance of professional collaboration and personal romance. At work, they maintained appropriate boundaries, though everyone on the team could sense the shift in their dynamic. Outside the office, they were inseparable. Marcus took her to gallery openings and introduced her to his small circle of close friends. She brought him to community events in Riverside, where he charmed the locals by genuinely caring about their opinions. The Riverside project progressed beautifully. Construction began in early autumn, with the careful renovation of existing buildings happening alongside new construction that complemented rather than overwhelmed the neighborhood's character. Marcus visited the site weekly, and Cassandra often joined him, both of them wearing hard hats and talking with contractors about preserving architectural details. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said one October afternoon as they stood watching workers restore the facade of Maria's family bakery. "I've made more money on my previous projects, but this is the first one that makes me actually proud." Cassandra leaned against him, comfortable with the casual intimacy they'd developed. "You should be proud. You're changing people's lives for the better. We're changing lives. This wouldn't exist without you." Maria's grandmother, Rosa, emerged from the bakery with a box of fresh conchas. "For you too," she said in accented English. "You save our business, we feed you." Fair trade, yes. They accepted the pastries gratefully, and Marcus spent the next 20 minutes asking Rosa about her plans for the renovated space, taking notes on his phone. Watching him, Cassandra felt a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. This man, who'd once seemed so arrogant and untouchable, was genuinely invested in helping a family bakery thrive. That evening, Marcus cooked dinner at his penthouse apartment downtown. It was the first time Cassandra had seen where he lived, and she was surprised by how warm and personal the space felt. Yes, there were expensive furnishings and original artwork on the walls, but there were also photographs of his family, shelves crammed with books on architecture and history, a guitar leaning in the corner that suggested hobbies beyond work. "You play?" she asked, pointing at the guitar. "Not well, but it helps me think." He handed her a glass of wine. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. I hope you like salmon." "I like anything I don't have to cook myself." They ate on his balcony despite the autumn chill, wrapped in blankets and watching the city lights. Marcus told her about his plans to expand his business model, using the Riverside approach for other developments. She told him about a proposal she was drafting for the city, advocating for stronger protections for existing residents in development zones. "You're going to change city policy," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. I'm going to try. You'll succeed. You're relentless when you believe in something. Look who's talking." He smiled and refilled her wine. "I have something I want to discuss with you. It's about work, but it affects us personally too." Cassandra felt a flutter of nervousness. "Okay. I'm starting a new division of the company focused entirely on community-centered development. Projects like Riverside, where the goal is neighborhood improvement rather than maximum profit. It's going to be less lucrative than traditional development, but I think it's important, essential actually." He met her eyes. "I want you to run it. Marcus, I've been working for you for less than 6 months, and you've already proven you're the right person for this. You understand community needs. You can negotiate with residents and city officials. You're creative with problem solving, and you're not afraid to stand up to me when I'm wrong. That last part might be the most important." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I know it's a lot of responsibility. You'd have your own team, full autonomy over project selection and design, but I believe in you. I've watched you transform not just the Riverside project, but my entire approach to this business. You can do this." Cassandra's mind was racing. Running an entire division would be a massive career leap. It would also mean more pressure, more visibility, more chances for failure. But it would also mean the chance to shape how development happened across the city, to protect communities instead of displacing them. What about us? She asked quietly. If I'm running a division, reporting directly to you, doesn't that complicate things? HR has already been consulted. As long as we maintain professional boundaries at work and disclose the relationship formally, there's no policy violation. But Cassandra, I won't let this job offer pressure you about our relationship. If you want to say no to the position but yes to us, or yes to the position but no to us, I'll respect that. That's not what I want. What do you want? She looked at him across the table, this man who transformed from an arrogant millionaire into someone she couldn't imagine her life without. I want both, the job and you. His smile was brilliant. Then both is what you'll have. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that quickly deepened into something more. Marcus led her inside, and they spent the night discovering each other in new ways, the careful professionalism they'd maintained finally giving way to the passion they'd been restraining. Afterward, lying in his bed with the city glowing beyond the windows, Cassandra felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. This was what happiness felt like. Not just romance, but partnership. Someone who challenged her and supported her in equal measure. I love you, Marcus said quietly into the darkness. I know it's fast, and maybe I'm supposed to be more careful about saying it, but I do. I love you. I love you too. She turned to face him, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. You're everything I didn't know I needed. Funny. I was about to say the same about you. The launch of the Community Development Division happened in January, with significant local media coverage. Cassandra gave interviews about the vision for community-centered development, while Marcus announced that Hendrick Development was committing $20 million to the division over the next 5 years. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Other developers started reaching out, curious about the model. City planners wanted to collaborate. Community organizations that had previously been hostile to development suddenly saw Hendrick Development as a potential ally. But the real triumph came in March when the Riverside project held its official reopening celebration. The renovated buildings gleamed. New businesses were moving in alongside the existing ones, and most importantly, the original residents were still there. Rosa's bakery had expanded into the adjacent space. Maria's family had a new apartment with actual insulation and modern appliances for the same rent they'd been paying before. And the community center that had been struggling was now thriving with new programming and resources. Marcus and Cassandra walked through the celebration together, accepting congratulations and watching children play in the new park. At one point, Marcus pulled her aside into a quiet corner near the restored fountain. A year ago, I would have demolished all of this and called it progress, he said, looking around at the happy crowds. You saved me from that, from myself, really. You saved yourself, Cassandra corrected. I just pointed out the problem. You did the hard work of changing. We make a good team, the best. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Cassandra's heart stopped. I know we've only been together for 7 months. I know some people will say this is too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Cassandra Hayes, you called me out when I was arrogant and lost. You challenged me to be better, and then you stood beside me while I figured out how. You're brilliant and passionate, and you make me want to be worthy of you every single day. Will you marry me? Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. Around them, the community they'd saved together celebrated. In front of her, the man she loved waited for her answer. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her while applause erupted around them. She hadn't noticed that people were watching, but apparently their private moment had become very public. Rosa appeared with champagne and more pastries. Maria's mother insisted on taking photos. The neighborhood celebrated an engagement along with the reopening, and Cassandra realized that this was what community really meant. Not just buildings and businesses, but shared joy and mutual investment in each other's happiness. That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the cleanup crews had finished, Marcus and Cassandra sat on a bench in the new park, watching the fountain sparkle with its newly installed lights. "I want our wedding here," Cassandra said suddenly, "in this park, with this community." Marcus looked around at the space they'd fought so hard to create. Not some fancy hotel ballroom, no, here, where we learned how to be partners, where we built something that actually matters. He pulled her close. "Here it is, then. Though I'm going to insist on good catering, Rosa will never forgive me if the food is substandard. Deal?" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, making plans and dreaming about their future. Eventually, Marcus said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing past my arrogance. For believing I could be better. For loving me anyway. You make it easy." "Liar. I'm difficult and stubborn and I work too much." "True. But you're also kind and brilliant and you're willing to admit when you're wrong. That last part is surprisingly attractive." He laughed. "Only you would find intellectual humility sexy." "It is sexy. Much sexier than the arrogant millionaire act you were doing when we met." "I was pretty insufferable, wasn't I?" "Completely. I almost quit after that first boardroom meeting." "I'm glad you didn't." "I'm glad you stayed and fought and refused to let me take the easy way out." He kissed her forehead. "You changed my life, Cassandra. You gave me purpose beyond profit. You changed mine too. You showed me that people really can grow and change. That's not something I believed before." They stayed in the park until the lights automatically shut off at midnight, then drove back to Marcus's penthouse, which had gradually become their shared home. Cassandra had officially moved in the month before, her modest belongings mixing with his expensive furnishings in a way that somehow worked. The wedding planning took over their lives for the next few months. True to her word, Cassandra insisted on having the ceremony in Riverside Park. Marcus hired the best caterers in the city, but asked them to incorporate Rosa's pastries into the dessert menu. They kept the guest list relatively small, about 150 people, mixing Marcus's business associates with Cassandra's community contacts. The wedding itself, held on a perfect June evening, was everything Cassandra had dreamed of. She wore a simple but elegant dress. Marcus looked impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, and the park they'd fought so hard to create provided the perfect backdrop. Maria and her younger siblings served as flower girl and ring bearer. Rosa catered a portion of the reception. The neighborhood turned out in force, celebrating alongside Marcus's wealthy friends in a mix that perfectly represented what they'd built together. During their first dance, as a local band played and the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Marcus whispered, "This is perfect. You're perfect." "We're perfect," Cassandra corrected. Together, he agreed. Patricia Acoy, the city council member who'd first noticed their connection, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. "I've watched these two transform not just a neighborhood, but each other." Marcus learned that success means more than profit margins. Cassandra learned that business and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. Together, they're changing how development happens in this city, and they're doing it while being completely disgustingly in love. It's nauseating and inspiring in equal measure. The celebration continued late into the night. Marcus and Cassandra circulated among their guests, accepting congratulations and feeling the joy of being surrounded by people they loved. At one point, Cassandra found herself talking to one of Marcus's earliest investors, a stern man named Richard, who'd initially opposed the Riverside redesign. "I owe you an apology," Richard said. "When Marcus first brought your concerns to the board, I thought you were going to ruin the company. I voted against the redesign." "I remember," Cassandra said diplomatically. "I was wrong." The Riverside project has generated more positive press and community goodwill than any of our previous developments. The community division you're running is attracting new investors who specifically want socially responsible projects. You've made us more profitable by making us more ethical. That's rare. He raised his glass. To being wrong and to having the wisdom to admit it. After the wedding, Marcus and Cassandra honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks exploring architecture in Rome and Florence, eating incredible food and enjoying being completely alone together. They walked hand in hand through ancient streets, discussed the evolution of urban planning across centuries, and made love in a villa overlooking Tuscan vineyards. "We should stay here forever," Cassandra said one evening as they watched the sunset from their terrace. "Tempting. But we have work to do back home. Always the responsible one. You love that about me." "I really do." They returned to Portland tanned and relaxed, ready to dive back into work. The Community Development Division was thriving with 3 new projects in various stages of planning. Marcus had started consulting with other cities, sharing the model they'd developed. Together, they were writing a book about community-centered development, hoping to influence how projects were approached nationwide. A year after their wedding, Cassandra discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus over dinner at the same small cafe where they'd had their first official date. His reaction was everything she'd hoped for: joy and excitement and immediate planning. "We'll need to baby-proof the penthouse," he said, his mind clearly racing. "And figure out childcare. I want to be involved, really involved, not one of those fathers who only sees their kids on weekends." "We'll figure it out together," Cassandra assured him. "Like we figure out everything." Their daughter, Eleanor Rose Hendrick, was born the following spring on a rainy April morning. She had Marcus's dark hair and Cassandra's green eyes, and both parents were immediately, completely smitten. Marcus took paternity leave, surprising his staff and competitors alike. He spent weeks learning to change diapers, walking Alina around the penthouse at 3 in the morning, and looking at his daughter with an expression of wonder that made Cassandra fall in love with him all over again. "I never knew I could feel like this," he admitted one night, holding Alina while she slept. "This completely terrifying, overwhelming love. Welcome to parenthood. How do people do this? The fear of something happening to her is paralyzing. You get used to it, sort of. Mostly you just love them so much that the fear becomes background noise." Marcus looked at his wife and daughter, his entire world contained in one room. "I used to think success meant money and influence, building an empire. Then I met you and you showed me that real success is this: family. Community, making a difference in people's lives. You've built both, an empire and a legacy. We've built both." As Alina grew from an infant into a toddler, Marcus and Cassandra discovered new rhythms for their life together. They traded off childcare duties, both of them committed to being present parents while maintaining their careers. The Community Development Division continued to expand, and Marcus increasingly focused on mentoring young developers, teaching them the lessons Cassandra had taught him. On Alina's 2nd birthday, they held a party in Riverside Park, the same space where they'd gotten married. The neighborhood had continued to thrive, with new businesses opening while the original residents remained. Maria, now 10 years old, helped entertain the younger children. Rosa's bakery had become so successful that she'd opened a second location across town. "This is what sustainability looks like," Cassandra said to Marcus as they watched their daughter play with neighborhood kids. "Real, lasting community development. Because we did it right. Because you insisted we do it right. Because you listened." They stood together, watching their daughter play in the park they'd created, surrounded by the community they'd protected and enhanced. It was a perfect moment, the kind that sneaks up on you in ordinary life and reveals itself as extraordinary. That evening, after Alina was asleep and the party decorations were cleaned up, Marcus and Cassandra sat on their balcony overlooking the city. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after their daughter went to bed, a chance to reconnect and process their days. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, "about expanding the model internationally. I've had inquiries from developers in Toronto, London, Sydney. They want to learn how we do community-centered development." "That's exciting. It would mean some travel, more media attention. You'd need to be involved since you're the real visionary behind this approach," Cassandra considered. "As long as we can bring Alina sometimes." "I don't want to be gone for long stretches." "Agreed. We do this as a family or we don't do it at all. Look at you, prioritizing family over business expansion. I learned from the best." He pulled her close. "You know, 5 years ago I would have jumped at international expansion without a second thought. Would have been on a plane within days, chasing the next big success. Now I'm negotiating based on bedtime schedules and preschool drop-offs. You regret it. This quieter, more complicated life." "Are you kidding? This is everything. You're everything. You and Alina, this life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed of having." He tilted her face up to kiss her. "You're everything I didn't know I needed. I spent years thinking success would make me happy, and it took you calling me arrogant in a boardroom to realize I was completely lost. You weren't lost. You were just pointed in the wrong direction. And you redirected me, gave me purpose beyond profit. Taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness and that caring deeply is the bravest thing you can do." Cassandra felt tears prick her eyes. Even after years together, Marcus could still undo her with his honesty. "You taught me things too, that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. That privilege isn't inherently bad if you use it to lift others up. That love means constantly choosing each other, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Riverside was thriving. Other neighborhoods were being developed using their model. Young professionals were choosing community-centered careers because of the example they'd set. They'd created ripples that extended far beyond what they could see. A year later, Cassandra gave birth to their second child, a son they named Daniel Marcus. Alina was thrilled to be a big sister, though she initially protested that the baby was boring because he couldn't play yet. Marcus, now a veteran parent, took the sleepless nights and constant feedings in stride. The international expansion of their development model had proceeded carefully, with Marcus and Cassandra consulting on projects in 3 countries. They'd written their book, which became required reading in urban planning programs across North America. The Community Development Division had grown into the most respected part of Hendrick development, and several competitors had started similar programs. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Cassandra with a trip back to Italy, just the 2 of them, while his parents watched the children. They returned to the same villa where they'd honeymooned, walking the same paths and eating at the same restaurants. 5 years, Cassandra said as they sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyards. "It feels like 5 minutes and 5 lifetimes simultaneously. That's marriage with you. Time works differently. We've accomplished a lot in 5 years. 2 kids, a thriving business division, a book, international consulting. The best 5 years of my life, Marcus said, and I'm excited about the next 50. 50, ambitious. I plan to love you until I'm at least 90, probably longer if possible. Cassandra laughed. I'll hold you to that. They returned home to Portland refreshed and recommitted, ready for whatever came next. The children grew and the business continued to expand. Marcus gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations of Hendrick development, focusing more on mentoring and strategic planning. Cassandra became increasingly influential in city planning circles, serving on boards and advising officials. But through all of it, they remained fundamentally the same people who'd clashed in a boardroom years before. Marcus still worked too hard sometimes, and Cassandra still called him out when he was being arrogant. They still had their rituals, their quiet evenings on the balcony, their Sunday morning walks through various Portland neighborhoods. On their 10th anniversary, the city named the Riverside Park after them, installing a plaque that read, Hayes Hendrick Park, dedicated to community-centered development and the belief that progress should serve the people already here. They misspelled your last name, Marcus joked, pointing at the hyphenation. It's Hendrick, not Hayes Hendrick. Actually, I like the hyphenation. It represents partnership. You never changed your name legally. No, but this park is ours together. The hyphen works. They stood with their children, now 7 and 5, looking at the plaque. Elena was learning about urban planning in school and constantly peppered them with questions about zoning and infrastructure. Daniel was more interested in the playground equipment, but he dutifully looked at the plaque when asked. What does it mean, Daddy? Elena asked. Community-centered development. Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level. It means building things that help the people who already live somewhere, not just building things to make money. It means listening to what communities need and want, and then working together to create it. Like this park. Exactly like this park. This whole neighborhood, actually. And Mommy helped you do that. Mommy taught me how to do it right. Before I met her, I thought I knew everything. She showed me I had a lot to learn. Elena considered this seriously. So Mommy made you better, much better. And you made Mommy happy. I certainly try to. Elena nodded, satisfied with these answers, and ran off to play with Daniel on the playground equipment. Marcus stood and wrapped his arm around Cassandra's waist. Think we're setting them up for unrealistic expectations about love and partnership, he asked. Probably. But there are worse things than setting a high bar. They watched their children play in the park that bore their name, in the neighborhood they'd saved, surrounded by the community they'd protected. It wasn't a perfect story. There had been challenges and setbacks, moments of doubt and difficulty. But they'd faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to pass, marked by milestones both personal and professional. Elena followed her parents into urban planning, studying at Columbia before returning to Portland to work in the Community Development Division. Daniel pursued architecture, his designs focusing on sustainable, community-integrated buildings. Both children absorbed their parents' values, the belief that success meant serving others, that privilege came with responsibility, and that love meant choosing partnership every single day. Marcus and Cassandra grew older together, their hair graying and their faces lining, but their connection only deepening. They became grandparents when Elena had twins at 32, and again when Daniel's wife gave birth to a daughter a few years later. The grandchildren called them Nana and Pop Pop, and Marcus proved to be exactly as devoted to them as he'd been to his own children. On their 30th anniversary, they renewed their vows in Hayes Hendrick Park, surrounded by 3 generations of family and hundreds of community members. They'd spent decades building not just developments, but relationships. The Riverside neighborhood had become a model studied worldwide, and dozens of other communities had been developed using principles Marcus and Cassandra pioneered. 30 years, Cassandra said as they danced at the reception, moving slowly to a song that had been popular when they first met. And you're still the most interesting person I know. That's because you made me interesting. Before you, I was just an arrogant millionaire with a talent for making money. You were never just that. You just needed someone to remind you. I needed you specifically. No one else would have called me out like you did. No one else would have had the courage to tell me I was wrong and the patience to show me a better way. We made each other better. That's what love is supposed to do. They swayed together under the lights in the park that bore their name, in the community they'd built together, surrounded by a family they'd created. It was, Cassandra thought, as close to perfect as real life ever gets. The music played on, and they continued to dance. 2 people who'd found each other against unlikely odds and built something extraordinary together. Not because it was easy, but because they'd been willing to do the hard work of truly seeing each other, truly listening and choosing each other every single day. I love you, Marcus whispered into her hair. I love you too, Cassandra replied. Always. The evening stretched on, filled with laughter and dancing and the joy of being surrounded by people they loved. And when it finally ended and they returned to their home, now a house in the suburbs with a garden and a porch swing, they sat together watching the stars. No regrets, Marcus asked. Not a single one. You, just one. That I didn't meet you sooner. We met exactly when we were supposed to. You needed to become the arrogant millionaire so I could call you out and we could figure out how to be better together. Always the planner, seeing the logic in everything. That's why you love me. One of many reasons. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd spent 3 decades learning each other, building together and choosing love every single day. The future stretched ahead, unknown but no longer frightening. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, just as they'd faced everything else. And really, that was the whole story. Not the dramatic boardroom confrontation or the successful development projects or the awards and recognition. The real story was 2 people who'd been brave enough to be honest, humble enough to change, and committed enough to build a life together one day at a time. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.